I'm a project manager here at Armor. Sometimes it's myself, sometimes it's just my voice you'll hear for about the next 25 or so minutes. And my co-host today is our industrial sales manager. Now he is manning that question box, but for the amount of people on this webinar, if for some reason he does not answer all of your questions, don't worry, someone from Armor will reach back out to you within the next 24 to 48 hours to answer your question. And again, as I'm speaking and I talk about Rustimonials and just different material that we have, if you want it, then go ahead and put it in that question box. And one last thing on that question box, if you do not work in your office yet, if you're still in your home, if you're like me, you're going to be in your home forever, and you want something sent to your home address, and we only have your work address, make sure you give that information to Ryan so the material gets to the correct place. Now, moving on. If you are new to this webinar or to any Armor webinars, you might need a little introduction, or some of you might just need a little reintroduction to Armor. So at Armor, we manufacture rust prevention and rust removal products. But we know that our purpose is to protect your brand, your customer's brand, your parts or your customer's parts, and most importantly, your reputation. And how we do it? Well, that's VCI technology. We'll talk about it a little bit in the beginning before we get into the customer success stories. But I think a bullet point that I always like to point out is that second one from the bottom of the screen. Over 90% of Fortune 500 industries, well, they rely on Armor products. So here's how we are breaking down the webinar this morning. We're just going to spend a little bit of time, and if you've been on an Armor webinar before, you've seen this, talking about how do you identify and diagnose rust. We're going to do a little refresher course on what's VCI as a reminder of what is VCI. And then we're spending the bulk of the day walking through, I want to say it's 5 or 6 different customer success stories where people are using Armor products, how they used them, and then how that saved their customer either time or money. So first to talk about how do you identify and diagnose rust. So if your customer works with metal, they know this slide. If you've been on an Armor webinar before, you know this slide. In order to have corrosion, you only need 3 things. You just need metal, you need air, and you need moisture. And if you've got those 3 things, well, then you're going to have rust. Now, the interesting thing about rust is that the color of rust always tells you a little bit about what's going on or how that rust is formed. Now, we don't get too technical today. We don't dive deep into this. But if this piques your interest and you want some more of our technical research, we have a marketing piece called Chuck's Notes, and that's based off of Cliff's Notes, and it's all about the technical research and colors of rust. So if you want that, in that question box that we practiced earlier, just write Chuck's Notes or Cliff's Notes or Notes, and we'll get that sent to you. But back to the types of rust. So the first one on your screen is red rust. It's the most common type of rust that's out there. It's the type of rust you see on a part that's been laying out in the field, a motorcycle that's stored in a barn. It's the rust that we've all seen. In order to have red rust on metal, that metal is exposed to both a high amount of oxygen and to water. When those 2 things happen, you have red rust. Now the next one, and this is where you start to see it more industrially, is brown rust. And if you or your customers are experiencing brown rust, I want you to think contamination. Brown rust, contamination. Brown rust, contamination. Usually it's from fingerprints on the part, maybe it's from forklift exhaust, maybe it's swarf that's on the part, maybe it's coolant solutions, washer solutions that are just gone bad and have the wrong pH. When you see brown rust, some form of contamination is causing that rust. Now the next one is probably most interesting for today because as we talk about desiccants, and those have become a big topic in our industry. Now that's because when you see yellowish orange rust, what's happening is that there's a lot of moisture present near that metal part. So if your customer says, I have yellow rust, or that rust looks like it's dripping down the side of the part, then they need desiccant. They need to absorb some of that moisture from their packaging process. So if you want to learn more about desiccant, and we know that's been a big topic in the past year or two, then just type that into the question box, desiccant. We'll get some information on the type of desiccants that we offer, a little bit of information on how you use those desiccants, what amount you should use, what's the best type of desiccant out there. So yellow rust, orange rust, think moisture present. And then the last color I'm going to talk about is black rust. And this is very common when someone's using VCI or using poly that does not have VCI in it. Because in order to have black rust, you have metal, and then you have something that's covering that metal, either paper or poly without VCI. Because in order to have black rust, you have metal that's exposed to a low amount of oxygen. So if you're having a lot of black rust, let us know and we can talk about your correct VCI solution. So in regards to VCI, again, we don't get too deep in that, but there are multiple ways to prevent rust. And the one that you'll see in the customer success stories have to do with using VCI packaging. So you might be asking yourself, well, what is VCI? So VCI is pretty straightforward. VCI is represented right in the middle of your screen, and it's vapor corrosion inhibiting nanotechnology. And the only thing VCI needs to work is a carrier. And in the first example on your screen, that carrier is craft paper. Now that craft paper is coated, sometimes people use the term impregnated with VCI. You take your metal part, you can wrap it around like a Christmas present, and it protects that metal from corrosion or causing rust. Now in the next slide, you can see that we've swapped out craft paper as our carrier, and we have poly. And that poly is extruded with VCI. And again, you put that metal part into, say it's a poly bag, you put it into that poly bag, close it up, and that VCI prevents rust. Now, how does that happen? I think this image on your screen explains it pretty well. So VCI is represented in the little white dots. And VCI is volatile, which just means that it wants to leave the carrier that it's in, it's attracted to metal, and it puts a barrier around that metal, and it keeps out what we talked about earlier, keeps out those contaminants and moistures and things that cause rust. So again, VCI is representing those little white dots. It's volatile, it leaves the carrier that it's in, puts a barrier around that metal. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how thick is that barrier? Armor VCI is 4 to 6 nanometers thick on the metal. Now look all the way at the right-hand side of your screen. A single sheet of paper is 100,000 nanometers thick. And that's how clean and safe and easy VCI is to use. So I'm going to hop off the screen right now, and we are going to get into what you came here for today, which are our customer success stories. And the first one that I'm going to walk through is Cummins Engine Plant. And this is really the project that kicked off our close relationship we have now with Cummins. And this story is even more than just sales dollars, which we'll talk about at the end. But this relationship between Armor and Cummins really shaped the way Cummins viewed rust prevention. And their quality team has included a new guideline, and I quote, to get rid of rust preventative oils whenever and wherever possible. So how'd this happen? Well, here's the story. So first I want to show you the before of what they're doing. So what you see on your screen right now are 2 engine heads. And you can see in that photo, they would use 2 competitor bags, 1 for each head, and then they would add in Rust Tech, which we'll talk about in a moment. So Rust Tech, if you're not familiar with it, is an RP oil. Now, if you're not familiar with RP oils, you'll hear me say it a lot during our customer success stories, because for Armor and for you, we see a lot of success in moving a company away from using an RP oil to using VCI packaging. And that is because RP oils, while they are the old and traditional way to prevent rust, they are horrible for your customers. They're not that great at preventing rust. and they are bad for the environment, they're bad for metal, they're bad for the plant to have. So this is what they were doing before, 2 bags, and then they would take some squirts of Rust Tech and put it in those bags. Now, one of the things that was also happening was as they would set the engine heads down in the bags on the wood pallets, there'd just be enough of material and metal with a sharp corner that it would cut the bag open. So at this point, the before is we have wood pallets, 2 bags that would sometimes tear with RB oil in them. And that's the before. And then this is where Armor comes in. And our sales team goes in and says, you need to sample Armor products. You need to try VCI. So if you are on this webinar and you want samples of any Armor products, reach out to us in that question box. We are incredibly liberal with our sample program because we want our customers to identify their issues. We want them to trial the products and then let us propose a better solution for their rust prevention process. And that happened with Cummins. So the first thing that you can see on your screen is that we used, and I'll go back a slide, 1 single bag. And then when on the bottom of that single bag, we lined it with Armor wrap. And again, that's that craft paper that's coated with VCI. Now this did 2 things. 1, it allowed VCI into the process, but it also made just enough barrier to keep those sharp engine heads from cutting anyone or any material. So we see on here, we have our Armor wrap, and then we would take a piece of wrap and we would lay it across the top, and then we would close that bag up. And this would allow Cummins to remove using RP oils to prevent rust, and it also allowed them just to have 1 bag for 2 engine heads. So again, we have Armor poly bag, we have Armor wrap. This ended up being a 12% savings in material and a 30% reduction in labor cost, and saving them an annual cost savings of $130K. But it doesn't stop there. So what happened when we first went in and worked with Cummins was that we wanted to do apples to apples. So we were able to compare one, I believe it was a 6 mil poly bag with their 6 mil poly bag. But as the relationship developed, we were able to say to them, hey, you don't need to use a monofilm bag. You can use a Defender film bag. Now, we don't get too deep into Defender film today, but I do want to just share a little bit of information about what's the Defender film and how is it different than monofilm. And if you're interested in this and want to learn more about it, just write Defender film in that question box. So I'm going to go ahead and hop on the screen right now. So the way that the difference between mono and Defender film. So mono film has the VCI everywhere in the bag. The Defender film has 3 distinct layers, and the VCI is only in the layer that's touching the metal. So the best way that we can describe this is using an analogy of a light bulb. So there's old traditional incandescent light bulbs. They give off light, but they give off 90% of their energy as heat, not light. Well, out comes LED light bulbs. They use 75 to 80% less energy. So both bulbs give off light, but LED just does it in a much more efficient way. And the same is true about Defender film. And again, that's how deep I get into Defender film, because today we're just talking about different success stories. But if you want to learn more about Defender film, then just let us know in that question box. And for all of the success stories I share today, if you want the Rustimonial sent right to you, we can do that as well. So just say in that question box, hey, send me the Rustimonial, which is just our fun way of saying testimonial. All right, so up next is Tremec. And Tremec is a killer story. So imagine sitting around a conference table and you hear from your boss that your bonus is being used up and buying rust remover. So that would be a little surprising and a little bit of a wake-up call. Well, that's exactly what was happening with this customer. So how in the world did one company stop spending money to remove rust by stopping it from happening in the first place? And I'm going to say a lot of hard work, some tough conversations, and as Tremick says, a great partnership with Armor and Armor products. So here's the before, and you got to know a little bit of a backstory. So we'll call the plant just QRO in Mexico, and they were making transmission components, and then they were building with them right away. So in their own plant, they weren't really experiencing rust issues. But now they've got to ship those parts to Michigan. And when they were arriving in Michigan, the photos that you see on your screen, well, the parts were covered in RP oil and what our customer called a sandwich bag. And that's the time and the money, what I alluded to earlier, it was being spent to fix the rust on the parts. And it's an expensive problem that can be fixed not only using the right rust prevention products, but also the right knowledge that Armor provides about how rust is formed. So two main things were going on before we even get into the products that they were using. Number one was the part washer solution in Mexico was just bad. And what I talked about earlier, or if you've ever been on the Armor webinar, 15 reasons why rust happens, you know that part washer solutions gone bad can cause rust. So it took about 6 to 8 months to truly implement the use of deionized water, but they made the switch. So then the customer said to us after using deionized water, wow, if we clean it right and we handle it right and we ship the parts right, we're not going to have rust. And that was exactly what happened after. So Armor, they implemented using many of the Armor products in their process. You can see them here on the screen. When they shipped it, they decided to wrap those parts in Armor Wrap. They used Armor Poly. They even used, there's that desiccant to get rid of the moisture. They used Dry Coat Rust Preventative. Now, Dry Coat is a water-based rust preventative solution. Remember how I said that VCI just needs a carrier? Well, for Dry Coat, VCI's carrier is just liquid. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Dry Coat, you can type that into the question box. So again, Armor conducted training on VCI products, and for this customer, it was an annual cost savings of $60,000. So this is where I would say to you, if you are having an application issue that's causing rust, and you want Armor to learn more about it and use their expertise in rust prevention, let us know in that question box. Because just like what was happening with Tremick, while we switched the products they were using, it also had a lot to do with things that had nothing to do with packaging. It had to do with making sure the pH was correct on those part washer solutions. And then a little bonus, they were also able to add this on to other suppliers. And again, if you're on this webinar and you're having some rust issues and it has to do with parts that are coming into your facility, let us know and we can work with you upstream to make sure we solve those rust issues before they even make it to your plant. And again, if you want this rustimonial, just ask and we can send you an electronic or a physical copy. All right, next up is a success story with Continental. So if you look at the top right corner of your screen right now, Continental was using a competitor VCI bag in a competitor desiccant. Now look at the left-hand side. If it's not obvious, it was not working. And the plant was just having rust issues, no getting around it. And again, this story has to do more with training. Our international sales manager, Fernando, developed a relationship with their packaging engineers. And when the packaging engineers sent Fernando the photo you're looking at, he instantly saw that there was brown rust, which meant that there was still contamination. Some part of that metal was getting exposed to the environment. So he arranged a training with Continental to talk about the different types of rust and how they can stop these issues in their plant. Well, Fernando went to the plant. The plant manager said he was only going to stop in and say hi, and he ended up sitting through a 4-hour training on what they can do in their organization to prevent rust. And they knew they needed to do something, and Armor, well, we knew what they needed to do. We knew that they needed to use Armor Wrap, which you can see in the photo. But Armor Wrap is made from cracked paper, and sometimes there's a concern around using paper, which could have fibers. So Armor Solution was a different product, which is a poly-coated 30G paper, and that's what you're looking at. And then you don't see it in this picture, but the final steps before these parts were shipped were to wrap them in stretch film. Now again, remember how I said in the beginning, VCI just needs a carrier to work. And so we have stretch film that is extruded with VCI, and that allows you to, again, kind of like wrap a Christmas present or wrap it around that part so you can make a nice enclosed space for that VCI to work. So if you want more information about poly-coated paper, if you want more information about Armor VCI film with stretch, then just type that in the question box. Now, all together, this cost savings to this customer, and one of the reasons why it's on our success stories, is it was an annual cost savings of over $1 million. And again, it has a lot to do with training. And if training is something that you want on site in your plant, doesn't matter if it's in the United States, Canada, or anywhere around the world, we have partners in multiple countries around the world that can come look at your rust prevention and rust issues. And again, if you want that testimonial sent to you in electronic or physical copy, just let us know. All right, next up is GKN. And GKN is a pretty straightforward testimonial about how not all VCI is the same. And again, to say that, you'll hear the term VCI used out in the market. Well, not all VCI is the same. So I'm going to hop back on the screen here and talk about the best analogy we have to describe how not all VCI is the same. So say you're interested in buying a used car, new car dealer says to you, hey, I put new tires on it. And you go down, you buy that car, and you drive off, and 15,000 miles later, your tire treads are shot. And in that moment, you think, oh, there's a difference between generic tires and brand name tires. And the same is true about VCI. We all have our own VCI formulas, and they're not all the same. And not only that, is our VCI is not the same in 2022 that it was a few years ago. So we're constantly improving our VCI, improving what metals it works well with. What you're looking on your screen right now, our technical resources lined up. This is what our VCI for wrap and poly protected in 2016. And these are the improvements that we made by 2022. And it's still evolving and still improving. So if you remember anything from this webinar, remember that not all VCI is the same. So there's the actor. I'm gonna hop off the screen here. Pretty straightforward, which is just a clean, rust preventative part. And this picture was sent to our technical sales manager, which is a pretty great picture to receive. And again, if you want this testimonial sent to you, either in an electronic or in a physical copy, just let us know in that question box. All right, up next is Global Pump Company. And here is what Global was doing. Here's the before. Look really close in those clear bags, and what do you see? It is that gross, horrible for the environment, messy for your facility, not safe for your employees, rust preventative oils. And for those of you who've been on the green webinar, you've heard me maybe talk about the start of VCI. So just to give you a little bit of background on VCI, during World War II, the US government wanted to be able to ship metal and guns overseas without rusting. They wanted the guys in the field to be able to work with that metal right away. So instead of covering those guns and metal with RP oil, VCI was invented and used. And that can be the same for your plants. While less dramatic than war, nonetheless, we want clean, safe, and easy way for your team to be able to work with metal right away and not have it covered in RP oil. And there's the actor, which is just switching from using RP oil to VCI packaging. And again, if you're thinking about an application that you have that uses RP oil, you can type that into the question box. I'll connect you with your correct technical account manager to talk about how do you transition from RP oil to VCI packaging. And for this customer, it ended up having a cost savings of $65K. And again, if you want that testimonial, just let us know. So here's our last one, and I save it for the end because most of the stories I've mentioned so far, we've saved the customer time and money. And naturally we think, oh, okay, a RUST solution costs less money for the packaging. But sometimes it isn't the case. In this example, the rust prevention solution cost more, but the total cost savings for the customer was way less. So here's what they were doing before. Volvo had 3 different engine sizes that they needed to cover. And for those 3 different engines, they would use 1 poly bag. And there was constant rust on the bottom of 2 of the different engines because that bottom part would stick out of the bag. Now at Armor, we know that VCI works best in an enclosed space. So Armor created what you're looking at for this customer. And it is a bonnet, or what I like to think of as a shower cap. What was great for the customer is that Volvo got to still use just 1 SKU for their poly bag, but this bonnet fit all 3 sizes because the elastic gave enough stretch to fit over and enclose all 3 engines. So again, the bag itself did not cost less, and you can see that there's no red line on the bottom saying there was X amount of cost savings in packaging, but as a company, their total cost savings of time, which we all know the old saying, time is money, went down because they had true rust prevention solution for all 3 engines. And a little bonus, they loved that idea so much, they started using it on their turbo hole parts as well. And if this is a testimonial that you want sent to you, just let us know and we can get it sent over to you in electronic or into a physical copy. So you heard me say today, and I'll hop back on the screen, that VCI just needs a carrier to work. And what you're looking at are the Armor family of products, or what I call them, multiple carriers. So there's that stretch film we talked about, the poly. We have VCI in liquid form. So if you want this image or you want information about our entire family of products, just type that in the question box and we will get it sent over to you. These are some of the customers who use Armor products. So if you look at the screen right now and you say, oh, I'd like to work with them too, or I'd like to work with a customer like one that you see on the screen, let us know in that question box and we can connect you and talk about maybe the approvals, maybe the work that we've already done with them currently, or the work we've done in the past. So as I mentioned earlier, I know we're coming down to our last minute. If you typed a question in here and it was not answered right away, do not worry. Someone from Armor will follow up with you within the next 24 to 48 hours. And then the last thing I have to say is thank you. Thank you for spending your Monday morning with me, learning a little bit more about Armor VCI. When we close this webinar out, a survey does pop up. 1's the lowest, 5's the highest. We would love if you rate it, and also content. Our webinars have been built over the content that you want to learn about. So if there's something you want to learn about, type it into that survey and maybe you'll see a webinar. But for myself and for my co-host today, thank you very much. Bye now.